Welcome back to Catching Up to FI. I'm your co-host, Jackie Cummings-Koski, and for this special episode, we're sharing part 2 of Bill's guest appearance on the EverydayFI podcast with Meghan Combs. She explores the lives and stories of everyday people in the financial independence community. So Bill opens up about his FI journey as a late starter. And even I learned some new things about Bill. So you want to tune in for this. He, of course, represents our Catching Up to FI community. Bill had a lot to say, so this is a two-parter, as I mentioned, and we aired the first part last Wednesday. So now let's get into part 2.
Welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
Welcome to EverydayFI, the podcast that explores the lives and stories of everyday people in the financial independence community. We're back with part 2 of Bill's story that we embarked on last week. In today's episode, we get into Bill's money origin story, which leads us to talking about financial literacy, the good, the bad, and what we can do about it at home. We also dive into Bill's journey to finding the FI community and his why of FI as someone who is a latecomer to the movement. Towards the end of the episode, Bill shares his current challenges and wins in life. Plus, we both wax poetic about the parallels between health and personal finance.
I want to hear more about your early money story. So we know a little bit that your dad was a doctor, but I want to hear about what growing up with money was like for you. So let's start with what one of your earliest money memories is.
It's a good question, and it's one that I come up with a different answer for every time when I get a flashback. But, my early memories there's a paucity of them in my childhood. And I'm not sure if it's because my brain hadn't developed or there was a particular amount of trauma, but there was enough to go around. Yes, my dad was a doctor, but he was a state employee. They're mostly negative memories, unfortunately, more micro money traumas along the way. It was the typical patriarchal family. My mom was a stay-at-home mom after having been a nurse that married a doctor. And we lived in a modest house, a very middle-class upbringing, 3 kids. And there was always enough, but I still got jeans from Sears that could stand up on their own like they were starched. I don't know if people remember this, but they were very stiff jeans before the day of stonewashed jeans. That's how old I am. And so, yeah, we shopped frugally. I didn't know that my parents paid cash for their cars. They never talked about that, which I find interesting because I might have done something like that if I'd have heard them say it. I remember my dad doing the taxes every year. He was already a workaholic, and then when tax season came around in March, we wouldn't see him for a month because he was trying to scam the government out of every penny he could. And he even got audited one year, which traumatized me for taxes. And I've did my own taxes when it was the easy form, but as soon as I became a full-fledged physician, I handed that over to an accountant and was happy to do so. My first personal memory of money was I never went to camp, day camp, summer camp. When I was 9 years old, I worked at camp. I earned $5 a week, and I would hang out with the 4-year-olds and trundle around with them, doing whatever activities a 4-year-old does at camp, even probably took naps with them. But so I earned a very low wage, but it was a lot of money to me back then. And I've worked ever since at various jobs in the service industry, going through high school and college. I was a waiter, and so tips were a big deal. But the minimum wage back then was probably $2.85 or $3, something like that. So it never felt like a lot of money. But I didn't learn how to spend from my parents. I didn't learn how to save for my parents. I definitely didn't learn how to invest. It leaves you kind of feeling empty when you realize that your parents didn't help you with one of the most important things you have to do as an adult. And then there's some armchair quarterbacking when they say, "Well, I know you were doing all these wrong things with money." I'm like, well, why didn't you help me prospectively? Why is it sort of a punitive thing? So there's not one memory, but and it did provide, I shouldn't say, there are some positive memories. We would go on some nice vacations, and we lived in London for a year. So there were some very nice memories, largely around travel, that we were able to do. But the majority of the memories were more micro and negative, and they compounded. And it left me sort of wanting, I think, to spend and not learning how to spend healthily. As we talked about with Doug Norman and his wife, Carol, not his daughter, Carol, and how he brought her up, learning to spend is the first thing you need to do. You learn to save later. You got to learn how to healthily spend. And I didn't learn that.
It makes a lot of sense with how you said you kind of came to FI later, that that would be your upbringing. And it makes me curious, why do you think your parents didn't teach you about money? It sounded like they knew something about money, especially if your dad was spending a month on taxes. Why do you think they didn't teach you?
Well, they're a boomer generation, right? And I think it's somewhat generational. They came from parents that were the sons and daughters of depression, and they didn't talk about sex or religion or politics much either. There wasn't a lot of healthy discourse in my family. I think that was part and parcel to some of the pathology that was already there. My parents ended up getting divorced after a lot of turmoil. And I think divorce is probably common in financial illiterate families, I would imagine. That's just my own bias. My mom came into an inheritance, and my dad made her invest in something called Church's Fried Chicken, and that company didn't do well, and her investment didn't do well. But he was telling her what to do with her money, and she towed the line as opposed to making a financial decision for herself, which was, in patriarchal families, that's very common. And one of the things we try and do with our show, and I'm sure you're with your show, is empower women to take control of their financial lives because there needs to be equity and parity across the gender spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. I have talked freely about how I am the higher earner in my partnership, and my partner moved into my house that I own. We both own property separately, but we also came together later in life. He's going to be 35 in a couple weeks. I'm 37, and we met in our mid 30s, whereas generations before us were married with freaking 10, 12-year olds by the time they were our age. So I think for millennials and Gen Z, it's a little bit different. But I do think that there's still that aspect of, and it might, the gender part of it might be going away, but there's still that aspect of in relationships, one person tends to drive the money conversations and the money decisions more than another person. I hear that a lot on Ramit's podcast. Now, obviously, he's taking people on who have money problems. So that's, already there's like a bias there when you're listening to the people on there. But you still see this, genderless idea of the person who makes less or maybe who stays home with the kids thinks they're not contributing enough to the relationship because they put this inherent value in money, and meaning like they tie their own self-worth to money. And that's something that's more what I like to talk about. It's like you're worthy despite what money you make, but it is very important to understand money because like you said, it's a language that we all, not everybody does know, but everybody should know because it's the tool that you have to know how to use in your life. It just is everywhere. And it's funny, the other day, my partner and I were talking to my mom, and we were talking about the fact that politics has been one of those things where people are like, oh, we don't talk about politics. And I'm like, that's like saying you don't talk about money when it's literally in every single thing that you do every single day. So, like, if you complain about a pothole in your road that hasn't been fixed for a month on end, that's politics. Those are your elected officials who are supposed to get that fixed for you. And guess what? It also takes money to fix that pothole or those streetlights that are out or whatever, or fund the school that you send your kids to. Like it's everywhere. Why are we not talking about this? And I get it because people are like, oh, they don't want to fight. And I find that so interesting. That's what I'm trying to undo is like, it doesn't need to be a fight. It just needs to be a discourse. Like it just needs to be a conversation.
You're correct, and it brought up another memory because in my household growing up, money was a weapon. It was a tool that was more of a hatchet, and, my mom was the spender, my dad was the earner, and there was a lot of animosity there, and there was tight reins placed on money between the 2 of them, and money was certainly one of the things that broke up the marriage. There was a lot of other things, but that certainly played a role, and I remember lots of fights. Our dinner table was a war zone at times, and it was not fun to sit down at a family dinner because it turned into a fight.
Yeah, and I mean, that's unfortunate, and it makes me wonder, with that kind of atmosphere that you grew up and with that kind of idea of money as a blade, as a weapon, how do you think that affected or shapes your financial philosophies as an adult? I mean, we've kind of alluded to this a little bit, but specifically, do you see any parallels with how your parents handled money, talked about money, didn't talk about money, and your adult life prior to FI? Let's talk about prior to FI, right? Because after FI, we've changed and we've evolved and we are now a better version of ourselves. But prior to FI, how do you think that shaped your life?
Well, it comes down to a scarcity versus abundance mindset. And the memories I have about money early on, I think left me with a scarcity mindset. So that when it turned into the fact that I had money to spend, I wanted to spend it. And I don't just spend it on myself. I mean, I wanted to give it to others in so say, on my wife and family, and we're very like-minded when it comes to what we do. We're not necessarily frugal, which is one of the reasons we're not FI. We were able to downsize, we were able to downshift, we downsized our house, our cars, they're all paid off. So we're debt-free actually now. And so we're on the same page, and that's different than was true for our parents. We have a much healthier relationship now with money. We were out of balance. There was scarcity on the front end, there was spend thriftiness in the middle, and now we've reached sort of a period of balance where we don't fight about money. We have similar priorities, similar values, and those are the things you've got to assess before you can really wield money as a proper tool.
Did you ever fight about money with your wife, including when you found the FI movement?
Not no, not since then, and she's been very supportive. She's come to the conferences with me. She loves the social aspect of it and the friends we've made. She just wants me to make sure that the money's there when she needs it, so it provides a little bit of stress. Do we sit down and talk about a budget? No. Do I track it? Yes, and I'll needle her sometimes when I say, "We need to rein it in this month." She doesn't want to get into the spreadsheet details, and I'm not a spreadsheet person either. So we're on the same page, but I handle the money from a mechanical aspect. She's more the visionary, big picture person, and she knows what's going on largely. And when I ask her, she's on it.
Yeah, and that's what's important. It's important that she knows that the trajectory is in line with what her goals are and what your goals are, and potentially where some money is, like percentage wise. But otherwise, I don't think it's important for people to know the nitty gritty. Like I said, there's only one person in the relationship who usually takes the reins on the day to day, who's in the spreadsheets. That would be me. It's probably the people who have the podcasts talking about money who are in the spreadsheet.
No, I mean, if there's one thing that we sometimes disagree on is how much economic outpatient care to give our kids. Her boundaries aren't necessarily as good with, throwing money at the kids. That's just sort of one of her values, and I tend to wanna rein it in, and so we'll have I wouldn't call them fights, I would call them discussions, disagreements, where we have to come to a resolution is this really actually healthy for us to do for our kid as opposed to letting them do it for themselves.
It's commendable that you guys can come together and have that healthy discourse or dialogue when it comes to those kinds of things. I want to know about how you found financial independence. I'm very, very curious about that because, you were trucking along, doing the doctor thing, living up the life. You got the expensive home, the expensive cars, the expensive trips, and then FI dropped in your lap. What's that story like? Who introduced you to this, and why did it resonate with you more than, say, another financial philosophy?
It's relatively straightforward. I was turning 50 and had sort of you can call it a midlife or late life wake up call. As I mentioned, this is a very common story. The kids are exiting the nest, but you're focusing on them differently. I had a job crisis at that time, and I Googled something along the lines of financial independence. But before even that, I was like, I found it. I found Bill Bernstein first. He's a retired neurologist who's a financial guru. He's written many books on the subject. I've met him in person. He's brilliant. The book that I ended up landing on was The Intelligent Asset Allocator. And the funny thing is, I told him this book is complicated. This is not where you want to start your journey because, and it wasn't Mr. Money Mustache like everybody else. I had to get out a financial calculator to read through this book and figure out how to do a financial calculator because of things he was teaching us through the book. So I started pretty complex and I worked my way back to simple over the next couple of years. I was in analysis paralysis for probably a year. Being a type A doctor, I had to dive down the rabbit hole of reading and listening to everything. Before I found FI, I didn't really know what a podcast was. I hadn't listened to a podcast. Before I found FI, you can see here shelves upon shelves of financial books, and I can say that I've read every one of them. And I spent probably a year reading. And then about that point, I felt comfortable and exited the private bank we were in and pulled the assets over into Fidelity and Vanguard to self manage. And that was a huge shift. It's not easy, clicking the buttons and moving hundreds of thousands of dollars because we didn't start from zero. But I honestly couldn't probably even go back and calculate our net worth. We still had a significant mortgage, and we may have been a net worth of around zero, but we weren't negative. After reading that book, I thought to myself, somebody should do this for doctors. Somebody should educate doctors what's going on here. And when I Googled it, I found Jim Dolly and the White Coat Investor, and he had started blogging around 2011 or 2013. So he was about 2 or 3 years into his journey. He hadn't started his podcast or his media empire. He had just been a blogger. And I found him and he'd already done it. I mean, I could have been the White Coat Investor. I could have been the guy, but he got there first.
Well, there can always be more than one, right? I mean, there's so many podcasts now that end with the word "fi." Every day catching up to fi. Choose a fi. So you could have been, but no, I love the fact that your journey took you to catching up to fi because, like you said, I think you fill a niche and that is desperately needed. So I'm kind of glad you weren't the first white coat investor.
Funny thing is the emphasis is on starting, not late. Late is a negative emotion, starting is a positive emotion, and our logo has a clock that's in motion where you get on the FI treadmill and you start out slow and then you get going faster. As a late starter, you have to get faster a little bit sooner, but late starters are the average American, as we refer to it. I mean, you're starting on time if you're starting in your 30s. You're really not late. Your 20s, you're figuring out life. The original tech bro person that fired in the early 30s is a total anomaly and is not a good example of what FI really means, quite honestly. They lived a life of deprivation, not balance. I would never want that for myself. You probably need to spend your 20s figuring out a lot of stuff, but you should be able to start by the time you're 30 because one of my monikers is work 20 for the money and the rest for joy. And so if you started at age 30 and you were on a 30 to 50% savings rate, you're going to be done at 45 to 50 ish, depending on how much debt you start with and how you manage your money. So, you'll retire early, but late starters are the average American. And it's also Gen X is the silent generation. We got caught in between the defined benefit plan and the defined contribution plan. And nobody told me what a 401k was. That came online in the 1970s when I was about 10 years old. And so my dad had not invested into a 401k. He was in a state pension plan. And it's hard to learn about a pension plan. And that's how he grew up. So it wasn't like he was educating me on the 401k. Nobody pulled me aside. There's like three simple things you got to do for somebody. Pull them aside when they start their first job and say, max out your 401k. Pull them aside and say, just invest in 100% stocks. and you're going for 20 years, and you're going to be fine. Nobody mentioned that to me. Pay yourself first, track your money. The lessons are like 3, 4, or 5 lessons. And if you just listen to those, you will be fine.
Yeah, exactly. I was actually talking to Alan, the podcast that's going to come out before yours, about the half privilege but half burden we have today with the internet and how much information is out there, and how, back in your day, you had to have somebody, like you say, pull you aside to tell you about this. There wasn't just a swath of information on the internet that you could go and find this. And so if somebody didn't do that, then you didn't know what you didn't know. And today, now there's kind of like the opposite problem where there's too much information. And so now it's hard to parse through what you should do, because you have all those crypto bros out there who are like, eat it all into Bitcoin or, Dogecoin or whatever. So there's kind of like this shift of, there's a little bit of privilege where you have a lot of access to that information, but also the quality of information is not necessarily the best either.
There's more to life than working for money.
Hmm.
And I think we're realizing that lifestyle is important. But there's more to life than having to work for money. And if you know, play it right, you're free from having to work for money, and you have time freedom after 15 or 20 years. Then you've got your whole rest of your life to play at the things that you want to try and experiment. No, we have to put the work in. There's no way, nothing is for free. You have to put in the sweat equity to get to time freedom. You will, if you're conscious and intentional and aware of what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And if we can get the government to put personal finance classes in high schools.
Well, my Jackie Cummins-Koski, my co-host, is a financial educator, and she'll tell you that there are 26 states that require a semester of personal finance in the nation, and the next gen personal finance, headed up by Tim Ranzetta, is on a mission to make that 52 states. So it's happening. It's our challenge, you and I as podcasters and everybody else in this creator space, to unwind the generational trauma of not talking about money, not educating about money, making sure everybody speaks English and money.
Yes, preach. Anyway, yeah, it's my partner and I the other day were just talking about, how irritating it is that you have 4 years of, literature class in high school. Like every single semester, like you have to have English literature every single semester of your high school. I swear, at least mine did. But I had 1 semester of government class, and it was an elective. It wasn't even required. And personal finance, forget it. We didn't have anything like that. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry. What are the 2 classes that are going to actually set people up for success? Government, personal finance, not English literature. We do not need to learn about Shakespeare. He's been dead for 500 years. Okay. I'm sorry. Like, no diss on Shakespeare, but 1 semester of Shakespeare, 4 or 8 semesters of government class.
Institutional learning changes very slowly. It's a victim of the boomer generation too. Now we live in an era where you can educate yourself on anything. That wasn't necessarily so easy before things like the internet. But getting change processed politically in schools is really hard. We're not as nimble as we would like to be, like a small business would be. You would like to think we are, but finally we're seeing the rock get up to the top of the hill, and it's going to roll down like a snowball, I hope, for my grandkids. Because modeling how you deal with money is as important, if not more important, than learning the technical language of it in school. You've got to, how your parents model it, what you learn about the language in school, how do you apply it becomes the issue. And I take it a step further, and people require social service projects in high school. They should require you have a job. They should require that you go work and get a paycheck, because once you've got that paycheck and you want to learn how to read it, and you want to learn how to pay your taxes on it, and you want to learn about banking, and then you want to learn about investing, then it becomes instantly applicable. We do it almost in reverse. It's like trying to learn German without ever going to Germany and living there. It's really hard to do. You've got to live in that environment And so jump in, have your tween or teen get a job and figure out how to manage money. And at the same time that they're learning the language of money.
It's so much easier and more fun to learn when it is real. And even if you don't get the job, like I'm thinking of both personal finance and government, if there's actual real life examples that a teacher can give a student to do, like, hey, we're going to give you some fake monopoly money. You have to budget it. If you don't budget it correctly, if you don't invest it correctly, then you fail this project. And how interesting would that be? Because then it's not like being lectured at, you're actually interacting and learning that way. And yeah, it's something that I would love to do if they ever opened up public education to outside consultants who could come in and do some of that stuff. I would love to do that. I don't have any creds though, so you probably could into it.
Oh, you probably could because, as I mentioned before, Tim Ranzetta is the head of Next Gen Personal Finance. On their website, they've established curriculums because what happened was the teachers weren't taught how to teach money. And you're having to reteach teachers that want to help their students this way, but just didn't have the tools. So, Next Gen Personal Finance has provided the tools for the teachers, teaching the teachers to teach the kids. There's over 100,000 teachers involved with this organization. We've had him on our show. I would encourage people to go listen to that episode and learn more about what he's doing. It's just incredible. And there's a lot of momentum in the right direction. We're talking about money here today. And we want to reach, at least on our podcast, and I'm sure you do too, people outside of this bubble, of this space. We're operating inside of the bubble. The people we need to reach are the ones where the person that enters the bubble says, "Oh, I've got 10 friends that need to hear this message," and bring them with you.
I think more and more people are hearing the term financial independence and even the term retire early, and their ears perk up in a positive way than they used to. So even today, before we hit record, I was at work, and I dropped from a meeting early because I told them I want to prep for my interview. And they're like, "Oh my god, you have a podcast? What's it about?" And I was like, "Oh, it's a personal finance podcast." "Oh, cool. Like what kind of personal finance?" And I said, "It's about the FIRE movement." And one of the guys was like, "Oh my god, you mean the retire early? Send me your podcast. I really want to listen to it because I just found that and it's so cool." And he just went off and was so excited. And my boss even was like, "Do you want to interview me on there?" And I was like, "Only if you become part of the community." He's like, "Sure, I'll do that."
Well,
So
it's funny you mentioned the workplace because when I drank the Kool-Aid back when I turned 50, all I wanted to do was talk about money. And my kids got tired of it, so I started a Facebook group called Financial Literacy Project where I brain dumped all the information I was learning because they didn't want to hear it anymore. I was called Lecture Daddy, and that's not how to change behavior, as I've learned the hard way. But one day I was talking to the young doctors to be who were scribes at the time about money because they were getting ready to take on student loans and make some big boy decisions and big girl decisions at a very young age. Can you imagine being 18 and taking on hundreds of $1,000s of loans, free money, so to speak, at least free on the front end? So I was told not to talk about money by one of my colleagues who was my direct supervisor. We don't talk about money at work. A few years later, I start a podcast, and this has been going on now a year and a half, 2 years. Everybody at work, it's leaked out. Everybody at work knows I'm doing this podcast. And then they'll come up to me asking me about this or that episode. And this is the paramedics, the nurses. And then I have physician friends of mine who, when they start hearing people open to the discussion of money, they say, go listen to Catching Up to Fi. And I'm very flattered. I've gotten more gratitude from the work we've done, the play we have done on Catching Up to Fi than I've probably gotten in 26 years of being an emergency physician.
yeah, it's that connection that you said that you lacked with your patients that you now have with your listeners. I
Mm,
love
yeah,
that.
yeah, I love it. I love the relationship, and I get to meet a lot of them. It's been a joy, just like talking to you has been a joy today.
Oh, thank you. You're so sweet. Okay, so I want to know why you're pursuing FI to begin with. I know that you felt like you were on this path where you said you had a zero net worth. And so I get that you were kind of course correcting to at least like have a retirement. But I guess why the principles? Are you trying to retire earlier than planned? You said you're 80% there and you're 59, so that sounds like it's earlier than planned. Or do you just want to hit like a regular retirement number? And then when you do, what does that life look like for you after you can quit working as a doctor?
Well, those are all good questions. As far as what does life look after? Well, I fear retirement. I don't like the word retirement because being a doctor, going to work 10 shifts a month provides me with structure. It gives me a reason to be. It's not necessarily the thing I want to do anymore. It's more of a job than it is a profession to me now. So I am looking forward to the time that that ends, and yet there is a number, but it's not the number. There's also a line in the sand as far as time goes where, yeah, I want to be retired by the time I'm 63. But what does that mean? Like I said, I hate the word retirement. What does the life on the other side of that really look like? Well, podcasting, sure, maybe paying attention a little bit more to my health, but I need to develop those interests before I retire because that gives me the power to achieve time freedom. What are you going to do at that time? Are you still going to set an alarm to look forward to get out of bed to, every day is a Saturday. And as people say, you can't play golf and sip martinis on the beach or Mai Tais, I think it is on the beach every day. And you're going to have another 20 or 30 years ahead of you. For me, the clock is in some ways ticking down. So I am looking forward to that time freedom because while I'm still in my go-go years and, slow-go years, I want to put off the no-go years as long as I can. And why the principles of FI? Well, because it's healthy. It's like you're being a vegetarian. It's a healthy way to live your life. People don't want stress, anxiety, fear, all these negative scarcity mindset emotions. They want joy, abundance, happiness, engagement, community, relationships. And we need to use our time wisely, our money wisely to enable us to focus on the things that tickle those interests in our brain.
I could not agree more. And it's funny that you said you can't golf and sip Mai Tais on the beach every day. I think you mentioned that you interviewed Doug. I just interviewed him too. And he said that when he told people that he was retiring to go and surf, his colleagues were like, "You can't surf every day in retirement." And he basically was like, "Watch me." And he did for 20 years, just surf. That's all he did was surf. And I was like, "Yes, you showed them that you absolutely could if you really wanted to sip Mai Tais on a beach. And that's all you did. You can do it." Well, okay, so we're wrapping up a little bit. And one thing that I like to get from my guests is any current struggles and current wins they're going through right now, because that's a really great way for us to connect to your story that's going on now and not just your history. So, what would you say some of your current struggles or challenges right now are?
Losing weight would be one of them, and I'm focused on that for the next year before I turn 60 because it only becomes harder. I've been very cavalier with my diet, and I need to be more intentional with that. It's hard to keep all the plates spinning in the air at the same time, and that's important to me. It's important to a lot of people. Obesity is a terrible disease in our society, and we have financial obesity too. It's hard to go on a diet, but you just need to, what's it called, kaizen, where you do the 1% better every day in the Japanese term, as Brad Barrett says too often on his podcast and his Choose FI and newsletter, just 1% better every day. I'm actually taking medicine to help me too, because I've recognized that I can't do it by myself. I needed help, and asking for help, going to your doctor, which hadn't been a habit of mine until more recently. So, you mentioned therapy. I think that's important for people too. There's a lot of money therapy that people need to work through. We all want to find an abundance mindset. That's where we all want to end up. You know, Giving is the art of receiving.
Yeah, I love that. And if you don't mind me asking, are you doing like Ozempic or something like that for your weight loss, or are you doing something different?
Wegovy.
Wegovy. Is that another GLP-1?
Yes, it is.
Okay. My other podcast love is medical podcasts. I absolutely love listening to them. And I listened to this one called Dr. Karen Explores, and he's a UK doctor. And they had a weight loss episode and they talked about Ozempic and stuff like that, and how they're like, it's just scratching the surface of what weight loss means and why this works for weight loss when that wasn't even its intended use, it's the secondary use. I also am having some weight issues because I'm going through early menopause. Menopause, you gain weight. You just do. I didn't change anything. I do exercise, I eat healthy, and I still gained a ton of weight in my belly area. And it freaked me out because it was 15 pounds in 2 months. I've never gained weight that fast in my life. And I was like, what is happening?
No different than taking on debt. You can take on a lot of debt really quickly,
Yeah,
but
that's true.
discharging that debt is like losing weight.
It's so funny how money and health and wellness correlate so much. I always say that about your credit score too. You can lower it really fast. You can gain weight really fast, but then getting your credit score back up and losing weight takes years. And I'm like, why is it like this? Why is the world like this? Why can't kale taste like a donut?
Things are very simple in your mind. They're not easy. That's again the brain emotion connect or disconnect. They can be simple but not easy.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us about some of your wins right now.
The podcast is a win. I love working with my partner, Jackie Cummins Costi. I love working with Diana, social media person, provides me with a lot of community engagement. I love meeting the people who are our guests. They become friends. I see them at conferences. I love seeing the people that are in other areas of the content creation business in this space. It is blown open my friendship circle. It's hard to, as an adult, it is hard to meet new friends physically unless you're involved in an activity that provides common ground. And the financial independence space is the common ground. I go every year to the economy conference, see all my friends. I go to other conferences to see them as well, Bogleheads, FinCon, Camp Fi. And then I bump into them like today we are virtually. The virtual world becomes real and it really expands your horizons. Everybody needs to participate at some level or another in expanding their friend circle this way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I actually just hung out with somebody I met at Camp Fi. Her name's Tanya. She lives here in Durham with me, and she's with Travel Penguin. And I'm going to link that in the show notes. And she makes jewelry. We've had so much fun. There's something in Durham called Durham Central Park. It's definitely not like New York City's Central Park, but it's very cute. It's a little quaint park. And they have a farmer's market every other Saturday. We went and it was such a blast. And we talked about Fi. And she said, I'm so happy that you came with me because you're not opposed to spending some money because we were spending some money on little treats and I got some fresh arugula and we did a candle making class together. I probably spent like $75 that day supporting small businesses and things like that. And I told her, I was like, well, I'm a spender. So I'm fine spending. And if you ever need a friend to go and spend money with, you can call me. But it was so fun. I want to hang out with her more often. I even told her we should seriously make this a regular thing because I have a hard time making friends as an adult, like you said, because I'm more discerning now that I'm older. When you're in college, you kind of just hang out with whoever's in your class and you just, go out drinking or whatever with them. And it doesn't matter who they are as people, they're just in your peer group. So you hang out with them. But now as an adult, I'm like, okay, do I actually want to spend a lot of time with this human being? Or are they not quite jiving with what I want in my life right now? And so that actually makes it kind of hard to have adult friendships. And then also people already have their groups that they're in. So yeah, Tanya, if you're listening, we need to like hang more, yo. So anyway.
In the end, it doesn't come down to money. It comes down to relationships and community. That's where your longevity and your health come from: physical activity, social activity. And money is only the foundation upon which you build the more important things in life. So kudos to you. The wins are in the people you engage with. And I've been very fortunate to be able to do so and have great relationships with my kids and my wife. The empty nest is awesome. That's a win, you know.
It's so funny because we're on the opposite sides of kids. I am wanting to have them and I haven't had them yet. And you're on the other side of like they're finally out of the house. And I'm like, I can't wait to have them in the house.
Well, time marches on so fast. It'll
Mhm.
happen for you, I'm sure, and it'll
Mhm.
go by very quickly.
Yeah, I'm gonna take so many pictures. All right, so we're pretty much at the end of our time, but before we leave, do you have a life hack recommendation or learning that you would like to share with the community?
It would be pay yourself first, save first, get to know your future self because that person does exist. It's not as far away as you think it is. And you need to take care of that person, the future you, because nobody else is going to.
It's a great one. Get to know your future self. I really love that. How can people reach you if they'd like to learn more or reach out to you?
Well, we welcome everybody that's interested in financial independence and catching up to FI in our Facebook group. We have a private Facebook group that's about 16,000 people. So please join us there for a discourse. It's a very safe and vulnerable space. We do a very good job of policing out the bots and the trolls. I have a great group of moderators that help me keep it safe. And then we have a podcast, which we come out weekly on Sundays. It's called Catching Up to FI. You can reach us through our website at www.catchinguptofi.com. Please email me. I'd love to engage with you. My co-host Jackie stands at the ready as well. Those are the two main. We have social media channels at Catching Up to FI. You're welcome to engage with us there. But our primary focus is the podcast and the Facebook group. Love to hear from you.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll definitely link all those in the show notes. All right, Bill, that's it for us. Thank
All
you for
right.
being here. It was so much fun.
Over
So-
and out, podcaster to podcaster. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you and your audience.
Thanks for listening to the EverydayFI podcast. If you're loving the show, here are some things you can do. Number 1, subscribe in your favorite podcast player and share the show with your friends and family. Number 2, please leave a review. I'm always looking for ways to improve the show. Number 3, check out my website, EverydayFI.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and leave comments for myself and the guest. Number 4, if you're interested in sharing your own financial independence story, you can find a submission form at everyday-fi.com/podcast. And finally, number 5, join my Patreon membership for only $5 a month at patreon.com/everydayfi podcast. This is a one-woman show, so every little bit counts. See you next time as we continue to go down the path to financial freedom.
So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. Our social media maven is Diana Falk, and our editor is Fritz Brazard. We love them, and they keep us going.
Yeah, Jackie, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community, and we hope you love us back. If you would like to support the show and our mission to help late starters, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to make a donation. The link is in the show notes and on the website.
Check out the show notes for resources mentioned in today's show. Also, head on over to our website at catchinguptofi.com and check out our vetted resources, partners, and affiliates for discounts and their services, because we love sharing great deals.
Please share the show with others and head on over to our Facebook community to help us grow. If you prefer video, head on over to YouTube and watch the show there. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could also leave us a 5-star review to help our message reach others.
And while we are financial educators that love to teach, remember that our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
So, Jackie, we'll see our audience next time on Catching Up to FI. Cheers.